A photographer entered a forgotten forest and found a golden watch that had been buried for more than 100 years. The moment he touched it, time itself began to break. Chapter 1. The Stranger in Black. The town of Ashwood was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened. Nestled between endless pine forests and quiet hills, it was home to fewer than 2,000 people. Everyone knew everyone else. Children rode their bicycles until sunset, old men gathered every morning at the small cafe on Main Street, and every evening the church bell echoed across the valley exactly at 6 o'clock. People believed Ashwood was peaceful, safe, predictable. But every town has secrets. Some secrets are buried beneath the earth. Others wait silently among the trees. And one secret had been waiting for more than 100 years. It all began on a cold October afternoon. The sky was gray, and the wind carried the smell of rain through the forest. 28-year-old Ethan Carter adjusted the straps of his backpack as he stepped onto the narrow trail leading into Blackwood Forest. Ethan wasn't a treasure hunter. He wasn't an adventurer. He was simply a freelance photographer who loved exploring forgotten places, abandoned cabins, old bridges, hidden lakes. These were the kinds of places that filled his camera with stories. His latest project was called Forgotten America. He traveled across small towns searching for places that history had nearly erased. Ashwood was supposed to be another simple stop. Take a few photographs, interview a few elderly residents, leave the next morning. That was the plan. But plans have a strange way of changing. Before entering the forest, Ethan stopped at a tiny grocery store to buy bottled water. The owner, an elderly man with silver hair and tired eyes, watched him carefully. "You heading into Blackwood?" the old man asked. Ethan smiled. "Just for a few hours." The old man didn't smile back. "You should leave before sunset." Ethan laughed politely. "I've heard that warning in every small town." "This isn't every small town." The silence that followed felt heavier than the clouds above them. Finally, Ethan paid for the water and walked toward the forest. Just before he disappeared among the trees, the old man shouted one last sentence. "If you hear a watch ticking, don't follow the sound." Ethan stopped for only a second. Then he shook his head. Superstitions. Every town had one. Blackwood Forest was breathtaking. Towering pine trees stretched toward the gray sky. Their branches blocked much of the sunlight, leaving the forest floor covered in shadows. Birds chirped somewhere high above. Leaves crunched beneath Ethan's boots. The deeper he walked, the quieter everything became. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. After nearly an hour, Ethan discovered the remains of an abandoned cabin. Only half the walls were still standing. The wooden roof had collapsed decades ago. Nature had almost reclaimed the building. He raised his camera and began taking photographs. Broken windows, rusted tools, an old rocking chair. Each image felt like a doorway into another lifetime. Then something caught his eye. Near the fireplace lay a leather journal. Its cover was cracked. Its pages were stained by moisture. Carefully, Ethan picked it up. Most of the writing had faded away. Only a few sentences remained readable. October 17th, 1926. He says the watch chooses its owner. I should have buried it deeper. If anyone finds this journal. The remaining pages had been torn out. Ethan frowned. It sounded like the beginning of a ghost story. He slipped the journal into his backpack. It might make an interesting photograph later. As he stood up, a strange sound echoed through the trees. Tick, tick, tick. Very faint, almost impossible to hear. Ethan froze. He looked around. Nothing. Just trees. Maybe it was a woodpecker, or perhaps a distant machine from the logging roads. He continued walking. The sound disappeared. A few minutes later, tick, tick, tick. This time it sounded closer, much closer. He turned quickly. Still nothing. His camera suddenly lost power. The battery had been fully charged that morning. He removed it, placed it back. Nothing. The screen remained black. A chill ran down his spine. Then his phone lost signal. No bars, no GPS, no map. Just an empty screen. That's strange. He looked at his watch. 4:17 p.m., still plenty of daylight. He decided to head back. But after walking for nearly 20 minutes, he found himself standing in front of the same abandoned cabin, the same broken rocking chair, the same collapsed roof, the same journal-shaped gap beside the fireplace. His heartbeat quickened. No. He turned around, walked in another direction. Faster this time. Branches scraped against his jacket. Roots nearly tripped him. 20 more minutes passed. Then, the cabin appeared again, exactly where it had been before. Impossible. He spun in circles, trying to understand what was happening. The forest was completely silent now. No birds, no insects, no wind, only tick, tick, tick. The sound was clearer than ever, coming from somewhere deeper inside Blackwood Forest, and for reasons he couldn't explain. His feet began moving toward it, as if the forest itself had made the decision for him. Far beyond the trees, something golden reflected the fading sunlight. It shone for only a second, then disappeared. Ethan swallowed hard. He knew he should turn back. He knew every instinct was telling him to run. But curiosity has led mankind into the greatest discoveries and the darkest nightmares. Without another thought, he stepped deeper into the forest, never realizing someone else had been watching him the entire time. From behind the trees, a tall figure, dressed entirely in black, holding a golden pocket watch. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Whispering Watch. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stepped farther into the endless shadows of Blackwood Forest. The air had changed. Just minutes ago, it had smelled of pine, damp earth, and fallen leaves. Now it carried something different, a cold, metallic scent, like old iron after a rainstorm. The ticking grew louder. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound echoed through the trees with impossible precision. It didn't sound like an ordinary watch. It sounded alive. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The trail behind him had disappeared. There were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that he had ever walked there. It was as if the forest had erased his path. He took a deep breath. This has to be some kind of illusion, he whispered to himself. But even his own voice sounded strange. The words seemed to vanish before they could travel more than a few feet. The forest swallowed every sound, except the ticking. After several minutes of careful walking, Ethan reached a small clearing. The trees opened into a perfect circle. The ground was covered in thick green moss. In the center stood a massive oak tree, unlike any he had ever seen. Its trunk was nearly 20 feet wide. Its twisted branches stretched across the sky like giant arms. Deep scars covered its bark. Some looked natural. Others looked like symbols carved by human hands. At the base of the tree rested an old stone pedestal. Time had worn away most of its edges. Rain and wind had nearly erased whatever had once been carved into it. But one sentence remained. Ethan brushed away the moss with his sleeve. The words slowly became visible. Time remembers what people choose to forget. A shiver crawled down his spine. He had never heard those words before. Yet somehow, they felt familiar. The ticking stopped. Complete silence filled the clearing. Ethan looked around. Nothing moved. Even the leaves hung perfectly still. Then, a single beam of sunlight pierced through the clouds above. It landed directly on the stone pedestal. Something beneath the moss sparkled. Gold. Ethan carefully knelt beside it. His fingers trembled as he brushed away years of dirt and leaves. Slowly, a beautiful golden pocket watch emerged. It looked impossible, not old, not damaged, not dirty, It shone as though it had been polished only moments ago. The case was covered with intricate engravings, tiny vines, stars, strange symbols. At its center was an unfamiliar emblem, an eye surrounded by 12 rays of light. The watch looked priceless, almost unreal. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct warned him not to touch it. Then he remembered the words from the journal. He says the watch chooses its owner. He laughed nervously. Come on, Ethan. It's just an old watch. Slowly, he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the gold, the world exploded into light. A deafening ringing filled his ears. The ground shook violently. The trees bent as though caught in a powerful storm. But there was no wind, only light. Blinding white light. Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the forest was gone. He stood in the middle of Ashwood. But something was terribly wrong. The town looked new. The roads were made of dirt. There were no power lines, no cars. Horse-drawn wagons rolled slowly past wooden buildings. Women wore long dresses. Men walked in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats. Children chased each other through the streets laughing. Nobody carried a phone. Nobody drove a truck. Everything looked old, very old. A newspaper boy ran past Ethan. Extra! Extra! Read all about it! One newspaper slipped from the stack and landed at Ethan's feet. He picked it up. His hands began to shake. The date printed across the front page read, October 17th, 1926. Exactly 100 years earlier. No. His voice barely escaped his lips. This can't be real. He looked around desperately. People walked straight through him. None of them seemed to notice he was there. It was as if he had become invisible. Or perhaps he wasn't truly there at all. A church bell rang in the distance. 6 slow chimes. Every person in town stopped what they were doing. Silence spread across the streets. Then everyone turned. At exactly the same moment. Toward the forest. Not a single word was spoken. They simply stared. Their faces filled with fear. An elderly woman made the sign of the cross. A little boy buried his face in his mother's dress. A shopkeeper quickly locked his front door. Then Ethan heard it. Far beyond the town, deep inside Blackwood Forest. Tick, tick, tick. The exact same sound, only louder. Much louder. Suddenly, the townspeople began whispering. The keeper has awakened. The watch has chosen again. Another soul has entered the forest. Ethan's heart raced. The keeper? Before he could think, someone grabbed his shoulder. He spun around. Standing before him was a young woman, no older than 25. Unlike everyone else. She was looking directly into his eyes. She could see him. Her face turned pale. You shouldn't be here, she whispered urgently. They'll find you. Ethan stared in disbelief. You can see me? She nodded. But you don't have much time. What is this place? What's happening? The young woman's eyes filled with fear. She looked toward the forest, then back at Ethan, and spoke the words that would change everything. The watch doesn't move through time. She paused. It brings time to you. A distant ticking echoed once more, louder than ever before, and somewhere, hidden deep among the trees, a tall figure dressed entirely in black slowly opened the cover of another golden pocket watch. Its hands had just begun to move. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Girl Who Remembered Tomorrow. The young woman grabbed Ethan's wrist before he could ask another question. Don't stand here, she whispered urgently. They'll notice you. Without waiting for an answer, she pulled him into a narrow alley between 2 old wooden buildings. The street outside remained strangely quiet. No one seemed to hear their footsteps. No one looked in their direction. It was as though the world had forgotten they existed. Ethan finally caught his breath. Who are you? He asked. The woman glanced around cautiously before answering. "My name is Clara." She looked no older than 25, yet there was something in her eyes that made her seem much older. Like someone who had spent a lifetime carrying a terrible secret. "You're not from here," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "I came from, well, 100 years in the future." Clara nodded. "I know." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "You... no? You're not the first." Those 4 words struck him harder than anything he had heard that day. "What do you mean?" Clara took a slow breath. "Every few years, someone appears here. Sometimes they come from the future, sometimes from the past, and sometimes..." She hesitated. "They never leave." A cold silence settled between them. Ethan tried to process her words. "This isn't possible." "It isn't supposed to be," Clara answered softly. "But Blackwood Forest stopped following the rules a long time ago." She reached into the pocket of her coat. Carefully, she unfolded an old photograph. Its edges were worn and faded. She handed it to Ethan. His hands trembled. The photograph showed 5 people standing beside the enormous oak tree in Blackwood Forest. 4 of them wore clothing from different time periods. One looked like a soldier from the 1940s. Another wore clothes that looked strangely modern. A third appeared to be from the late 19th century. And standing among them was Clara. She looked exactly the same, not 1 day older. Ethan stared at the picture. "When was this taken?" Clara's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Different people remember different dates, but I believe..." She looked toward the forest. "It was more than 70 years ago." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. I stopped believing in impossible a very long time ago." A distant church bell rang again. 1, 2, 3. Each chime echoed through the silent town. Clara's expression changed instantly. "We have to move." "Why?" "They're coming." "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she hurried toward an abandoned barn at the edge of town. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the walls. Everything inside looked untouched for decades. In the center of the barn stood an old wooden table. On top of it lay dozens of maps, newspaper clippings, handwritten journals, photographs, letters, and sketches of the golden pocket watch. Ethan slowly walked closer. His eyes widened. Some of the papers were dated, 1926. Others, 1954, 1955, 1956, 1957, 1958, even 2026, his own year. Someone had been documenting these events for a century. "What is all this?" Ethan whispered. Clara gently picked up a leather notebook. "My father started collecting these. Then I continued. He believed the forest wasn't haunted. It was broken." She opened the notebook. Inside were hundreds of names. Beside each name was a date. Some had a single line drawn through them. Others had 2. What do the lines mean? Clara closed the notebook. 1 line means they escaped. 2 lines, she paused, means the forest kept them forever. Ethan swallowed hard. "How many escaped?" Clara remained silent, then quietly answered, "Very few." The ticking returned. Tick, tick, tick. This time, it came from inside the barn. Both of them froze. The sound echoed beneath the wooden floorboards, slowly, very slowly. One of the loose floorboards began to rise, by itself. Dust floated into the air. Ethan stepped backward. Clara's face turned completely white. "No," she whispered. "It found us." The floorboard lifted higher. Beneath it was a small hidden compartment. Inside rested another golden pocket watch, identical to the one Ethan had found. Except this one was covered in dark red stains. It began ticking by itself. The hand started spinning backward, faster and faster and faster. Then, everything inside the barn went silent. Even the ticking stopped. A shadow appeared outside the broken doorway. Someone was standing there, perfectly still, too tall, too thin, dressed entirely in black. Its face remained hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. In one gloved hand, it held a golden pocket watch. In the other, a long wooden cane. The figure spoke for the very first time. Its voice was calm, almost gentle, yet every word sent chills down Ethan's spine. "You were never supposed to find the watch." A long pause followed. Then the stranger slowly lifted his head. "You were supposed to become its next keeper." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Keeper's Warning. The stranger stood motionless in the doorway. No sound, no movement, only silence. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. The figure's face remained hidden beneath the shadow of a black hat, but somehow Ethan could feel its eyes locked onto him, watching, measuring, waiting. The old pocket watch in the stranger's hand continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Clara slowly stepped in front of Ethan. "Don't look directly into his eyes," she whispered. "What?" "Just trust me." Ethan lowered his gaze. The stranger finally spoke again. "You've broken the first rule." His voice was deep and strangely calm. It sounded neither young nor old, neither friendly nor threatening. It sounded timeless. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. The stranger tilted his head slightly. "I want nothing." He took one slow step into the barn. The wooden floor creaked beneath his polished black boots. "I only protect what should never be found." Clara tightened her grip on Ethan's arm. "He's lying." The stranger let out a quiet laugh. "No. I stopped lying many years ago." He glanced toward the hidden compartment beneath the floor. "You opened a door that should have remained closed." Ethan finally found the courage to speak. "What is this watch?" The stranger remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered, "It is not a watch. It is a key." "A key to what?" "To time itself." A cold wind swept through the barn. The maps scattered across the table fluttered wildly. Old photographs drifted onto the floor. One landed at Ethan's feet. He picked it up. It showed the same stranger, standing in front of the giant oak tree. The date written beneath the photograph read, October 17th, 1886. Ethan's eyes widened. He looked back at the stranger. The face, the coat, the hat. Everything was exactly the same. You haven't aged." The stranger smiled faintly. "Neither will you." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" The stranger ignored the question. Instead, he slowly removed one black leather glove. His hand looked normal, until Ethan noticed the skin. It wasn't skin at all. Fine golden cracks spread across it like lines in broken glass. Inside those cracks, a soft golden light glowed. It was as though time itself flowed beneath his skin. "I was once just like you," the stranger said quietly. "I found the watch. I believed I could control it. I believed I could change history." He looked down at his glowing hand. "I was wrong." Silence filled the barn once more. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had been haunting him. "Who are you?" The stranger slowly raised his eyes. "My name," he hesitated, "was Jonathan Hale." The name meant nothing to Ethan, but beside him, Clara gasped. "No, it can't be." "You know him?" Ethan asked. Clara nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to tell stories about him. He disappeared before the town was founded. He was only 29 years old." Ethan looked back at Jonathan. "How old are you now?" Jonathan stared at the watch in his hand. "I stopped counting after 140 years." A long silence followed. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The first drops of rain began falling on the barn roof. Jonathan looked toward Ethan. You still have a choice. What choice? Return the watch, and everything you've seen will disappear. You'll wake up in your own time. You'll remember almost nothing. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. That's possible? Jonathan nodded, but his voice became heavier. Someone else will eventually find it. And the cycle will begin again. Ethan looked at Clara. What happens if I don't return it? Neither Clara nor Jonathan answered immediately. Instead, Jonathan reached into his coat. He carefully unfolded a yellowed piece of paper. It looked incredibly old. He handed it to Ethan. At the top was a newspaper headline. Ashwood Chronicle, October 19th, 2026. Ethan frowned. That date was only 2 days after he had entered the forest. His eyes moved down the page. Then his entire body froze. There was a photograph. His photograph. Below it was a headline. Local photographer missing after entering Blackwood Forest. Ethan's hands began shaking uncontrollably. He read the article. Search teams had spent weeks looking for him. His backpack had been found. His camera had been found. But Ethan Carter had vanished without a trace. His family had declared him legally dead 1 year later. No, he whispered. This hasn't happened yet. Jonathan looked at him with sad eyes. For you. No, it already has. Lightning flashed outside. For one brief second, the inside of the barn became as bright as daylight, and in that flash, Ethan noticed something horrifying. Jonathan wasn't alone. Standing silently behind him were dozens of shadowy figures. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothing from different centuries. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. Each one held a golden pocket watch, and every watch began ticking at exactly the same moment. Tick, tick, tick. The sound grew louder, 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 until it became almost unbearable. Then every shadow slowly turned and looked directly at Ethan. Jonathan closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. They've chosen you. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Hall of Forgotten Time. The ticking became unbearable. It no longer sounded like dozens of watches. It sounded like a single heartbeat, growing louder with every passing second. Tick, tick, tick. Ethan covered his ears. It made no difference. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside his mind. The shadowy figures remained perfectly still. Their faces were pale, expressionless. Their eyes reflected no fear, no anger, no sadness, only endless waiting. Jonathan slowly stepped aside. They want to see you. Ethan shook his head. I don't understand any of this. You will. Jonathan pointed toward the back wall of the barn. There. Ethan followed his finger. The wooden wall had changed. Moments ago, it had been solid. Now, a narrow doorway had appeared. Beyond it stretched a long stone hallway illuminated by flickering lanterns. The air pouring from inside was icy cold. It carried the scent of ancient paper, old wood, and burning candles. Clara grabbed Ethan's sleeve. Don't go. Jonathan looked at her. He must. There has to be another way. There isn't. Jonathan's voice remained calm. The hall has already opened. It never opens for the wrong person. Ethan swallowed nervously. What is the hall? Jonathan looked toward the dark passage. It remembers every person the watch has ever chosen. No one spoke. Finally, Ethan took a cautious step forward, then another. As soon as he crossed the doorway, the entrance vanished behind him. He spun around. The barn was gone. Jonathan, Clara, the shadows. Everything had disappeared. He was alone. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. Stone walls rose on either side. Thousands of candles burned without melting. Their flames never flickered, never moved. Only silence filled the air. After several minutes of walking, the hallway opened into a massive circular chamber. Ethan stopped in amazement. The room was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Towering bookshelves reached so high they disappeared into darkness. Ancient clocks covered every wall. Some were tiny pocket watches. Others were enormous grandfather clocks. Some had stopped forever. Others moved backward. Some had no hands at all. Yet every one of them ticked. In the very center of the chamber stood a single wooden desk. Behind it sat an elderly man wearing round spectacles. He calmly wrote inside an enormous leather book. Without looking up, he spoke. "You took longer than expected." Ethan froze. "You were expecting me?" The old man continued writing. "I've been expecting you for 100 years. Ethan slowly approached the desk. "Who are you?" The old man finally raised his head. His gentle eyes were filled with exhaustion. "My name is Elias. I am the archivist. The keeper of every moment that was, and every moment that never happened." Ethan stared at him. "I don't understand." Elias smiled kindly. "Very few people do." He closed the enormous book. Dust drifted into the air. "This place exists outside time. Every choice, every second, every forgotten memory, they all arrive here eventually." Ethan looked around the endless library. "Who built this place?" Elias became unusually quiet. "No one. It simply appeared. The same day, the first golden watch was created." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The watch was created? Oh yes. It was never discovered. It was made. By whom? Elias looked toward the darkness above. His smile disappeared. "That question has destroyed wiser men than me." Silence returned. Then Elias stood. Although he looked nearly 90 years old, he moved with surprising ease. "Come. There is something you must see." He led Ethan between endless shelves. Every book carried nothing but a year on its spine. 1492, 1493, 1494, 1495, 1496, 1497, 1498. Hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of books, each representing a single year. Elias stopped before one shelf. He gently removed a thick volume marked 2026. "This is your year." He opened the book. The pages began turning by themselves, faster and faster, until they suddenly stopped. There, on the right-hand page, was a photograph. Ethan's photograph, exactly the same one from the newspaper. Beneath it were thousands of handwritten lines. His childhood, his school, his first camera, his travels, every memory, every decision, every mistake, every success, his entire life, written in perfect detail. Ethan could barely breathe. This is impossible." "No," Elias said softly. "This is memory." Then, something strange caught Ethan's attention, near the bottom of the final page. The writing simply stopped. The rest of the page remained completely blank. "What does that mean?" Elias closed the book. "It means your future has not yet been written." A tiny spark of hope returned. "So I can still change it?" "Perhaps. But every choice has a price." Ethan looked into the old man's eyes. "What price?" Elias slowly walked toward a massive window overlooking endless darkness. "The golden watch protects time, but time demands balance. When someone changes the past, the future changes with it. When someone escapes, someone else becomes trapped. When someone lives, someone else may disappear." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "So every miracle," Elias nodded, "creates another tragedy." Suddenly, a loud boom. The entire library shook violently. Books crashed from the shelves. Clocks rang all at once. The candles dimmed. Elias's expression changed instantly. "They found you." "Who?" "The watchkeepers." Before Ethan could ask another question, a deafening crack echoed through the chamber. One of the giant wooden doors slowly opened. Dark mist rolled across the floor. Heavy footsteps echoed through the library. 1, 2, 3. A deep voice emerged from the darkness. "You have broken the oldest law," another voice answered. "The boy must never leave." Then a third voice, colder than ice, whispered, "Bring him to the council." As the mist cleared, 12 figures dressed in identical black robes stepped into the Hall of Forgotten Time, and every one of them carried a golden pocket watch. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Council of the 12. The library fell into complete silence. The 12 figures stood perfectly still beneath the towering shelves. Each wore a long black robe that touched the floor. Their faces were hidden behind smooth silver masks. No eyes, no mouths, no expressions, only 12 identical masks reflecting the candlelight. Yet Ethan could feel them watching him, every movement, every breath, every heartbeat. One by one, the 12 pocket watches clicked open. Click, click, click. The sound echoed through the endless library. At exactly the same moment, every clock on the walls stopped ticking. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The tallest of the masked figures stepped forward. His voice echoed unnaturally through the chamber. "Ethan Carter, you stand before the Council of the 12, the Guardians of the Balance." Ethan forced himself to speak. "What balance?" The masked figure slowly raised his watch. "The balance between what happened and what must happen." Ethan looked toward Elias. The old archivist lowered his eyes but said nothing. Another member of the council spoke. "For 140 years, Jonathan Hale has protected the First Watch, a duty he accepted willingly." A third voice followed. "But his time is ending." A fourth. "The Watch has chosen another." All 12 members spoke together. "It has chosen you." Their voices merged into one deep, thunderous sound that shook the walls. Ethan's pulse raced. "I never agreed to any of this." The council remained silent. Then the tallest figure replied, "Neither did Jonathan." Jonathan. The name echoed through Ethan's mind. He remembered the glowing cracks in Jonathan's hand, the sadness in his eyes, the loneliness. That wasn't a life. It was a prison. "I won't become the next keeper." For the first time, the council reacted. The candles dimmed. A cold wind swept across the library. One of the smaller masked figures stepped forward. "You believe this is a choice?" "It is not." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then why bring me here?" Instead of answering, the council leader turned toward Elias. "Show him." The old archivist sighed heavily. "I hoped it would never come to this." He slowly walked toward the center of the chamber. Resting there was an enormous clock unlike any Ethan had ever seen. It stood nearly 20 feet tall. Its face was made of black stone. Instead of numbers, 12 strange symbols circled its edge. Its hands had not moved for centuries. Elias gently placed one hand upon the ancient clock. Immediately, golden light spread through its surface. The room disappeared. Ethan suddenly found himself standing in the middle of Blackwood Forest again. But something was terribly wrong. The trees were burning. Towering flames climbed into the night sky. Smoke covered the stars. The giant oak tree had fallen. Ash drifted through the air like black snow. The town of Ashwood was gone. Only ruins remained. Collapsed houses, broken streets, silent churches, not a single living person. Ethan stared in horror. "What happened?" Elias appeared beside him. "This is one possible future." They walked through the destroyed town. Everything had been reduced to ashes. Then Ethan noticed something. People, dozens of them. standing silently among the ruins. Transparent, almost like ghosts. A little girl held a broken doll. An elderly man stared at the empty remains of his home. A firefighter still carried a damaged helmet. None of them spoke. None of them moved. "They're trapped," Elias whispered. "They exist outside time, neither alive nor dead." Ethan slowly turned. What caused this? Elias looked towards the horizon. Far away, a single golden light shone through the smoke. The watch. Ethan frowned. "I thought the watch protected time." "It does, when someone protects it. But if the watch is abandoned..." Elias paused. Time begins to collapse. Without warning. The vision changed again. This time, Ethan stood in a modern city. Cars filled the streets. People hurried along sidewalks. Everything looked normal. Then, at exactly 12 o'clock, every clock stopped. Traffic lights froze. Birds remained suspended in midair. Rain stopped falling. People became motionless like statues. The entire world had frozen. Only Ethan and Elias could move. "What is this?" "The second future." "What caused it?" Elias answered quietly. "No keeper." The vision changed a third time. Ethan gasped. He was standing in front of his own childhood home. His younger self, only 10 years old, was riding a bicycle in the driveway. His mother laughed from the front porch. His father was washing the family car. It was a perfect summer afternoon. Then, a black figure appeared across the street. Jonathan, younger, still wearing the black coat, still carrying the golden watch. He looked directly toward Ethan, as though he had known Ethan would one day witness this moment. Jonathan slowly whispered, "I'm sorry." He closed the watch. Everything disappeared. Ethan found himself back inside the library. His hands were shaking. His eyes were filled with confusion. What did that mean? Elias looked heartbroken. "Jonathan visited your childhood." "Why?" "To make sure you survived." Ethan stared at him. "What? If you had died as a child, the watch would never have chosen you." A wave of anger surged through Ethan. "So my entire life has been planned?" Elias couldn't answer, because someone else did. Jonathan. He stepped out from the shadows at the far end of the library. His face looked older than before. More tired. More human. He slowly removed his hat. For the first time, Ethan saw him clearly. He looked no older than 30. But his eyes carried centuries of sorrow. Jonathan spoke softly. "I've protected you since the day you were born." Ethan felt the room spin. "What?" "I made sure you survived every moment that should have killed you. The car accident when you were 12, the river when you almost drowned, the falling tree during the storm." Ethan remembered every event, every impossible escape. "You... that was you?" Jonathan nodded. "I wasn't saving your life. I was protecting my replacement." Silence swallowed the room. Jonathan's voice broke for the first time. "I never wanted this for you, but I couldn't stop it." He slowly held out the golden watch. Its cover opened by itself. The hands began spinning rapidly. Then, for the very first time, the watch spoke, not with a voice, but with a whisper that echoed inside Ethan's mind. "The final choice is approaching." End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The First Keeper's Secret. The whisper lingered inside Ethan's mind long after the golden watch fell silent. "The final choice is approaching." The words echoed over and over, growing quieter each time until they disappeared completely. No one in the library moved. Even the members of the council seemed uneasy. Jonathan slowly closed the cover of the watch. The ticking stopped. For the first time since Ethan had entered Blackwood Forest. There was absolute silence. Jonathan looked toward the council. "You've heard it." The tallest member nodded. "The watch has spoken." Another member stepped forward. "Then the ritual must begin." Jonathan's expression hardened. "No." The council members looked at one another. One of them asked, "Are you refusing the watch?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward Ethan. "There is something they haven't told you." The council leader's voice thundered across the chamber. "Enough!" Jonathan ignored him. "They've told you what happens if there is no keeper. They've shown you ruined futures. They've spoken about balance." He paused. "But they never told you how all of this began." Ethan looked from Jonathan to the council. "Is that true?" No one answered. Jonathan took a slow breath. "Come with me." Before anyone could stop him, Jonathan pressed the golden watch against the ancient black clock in the center of the library. The clock chimed once. A hidden doorway opened behind it. A staircase descended into darkness. Jonathan looked back. "This is where the truth sleeps." The council leader stepped forward. "You are forbidden to enter." Jonathan smiled sadly. "I stopped obeying centuries ago." He disappeared down the staircase, after only a moment's hesitation. Ethan followed. Behind them, the heavy stone door closed. The council's voices faded into silence. The staircase seemed endless. Stone steps spiraled deep beneath the library. The air grew colder with every step. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. Somewhere below, water echoed through the darkness. After what felt like 20 minutes, the staircase ended. Ethan found himself standing inside a vast underground chamber. Unlike the library above, this place looked ancient, far older than any building he had ever seen. Massive stone pillars supported the ceiling. Strange symbols covered every wall. In the center of the chamber stood 12 enormous statues, arranged in a perfect circle. Each statue wore a hooded robe. Each held a different object: a sword, a key, a lantern, a book, a compass, and one held a golden pocket watch. Jonathan walked toward that statue. He gently brushed centuries of dust from its base. An inscription slowly became visible. Ethan knelt to read it. "To the first keeper, who chose eternity so others could keep tomorrow." Ethan looked up. "The first keeper?" Jonathan nodded. "He was the man who created the watch." "I thought no one knew who made it." "Almost no one." Jonathan's eyes never left the statue. "His name was—" He hesitated. "Alexander Ashcroft." The name echoed strangely through the chamber. Jonathan continued. "He wasn't a king. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a magician. He was a clockmaker. A brilliant one." Jonathan smiled faintly. "They called him the greatest craftsman in America. He believed time was alive. He spent 40 years trying to understand it. Then one winter night, he succeeded." Ethan frowned. "Succeeded in what?" Jonathan slowly raised his hand. "In hearing time." Silence filled the chamber. Jonathan continued his story. Alexander claimed that time wasn't a river. It wasn't a straight line. It was a living ocean. Every choice created waves. Every life changed countless others. But he also discovered something terrifying. "What?" Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "The ocean was dying." Ethan stared at him. Dying. There were fractures, tears, moments disappearing, entire memories being erased. Jonathan pointed towards the walls. The strange symbols began glowing softly. He believed humanity was accidentally damaging time itself. So he built a machine. The Golden Watch. A machine capable of stitching broken moments back together. Ethan looked at the watch in Jonathan's hand. "So, it was meant to save the world?" Jonathan nodded slowly. "Yes. But Alexander made one mistake. What mistake? He tested it. On himself. Jonathan closed his eyes. The moment he wound the watch, time stopped. The workshop vanished. The town vanished. Alexander vanished. And when the world began moving again, he was no longer a man. He had become the first keeper. Ethan looked at the statue once more. Something about its face seemed familiar. Very familiar. He stepped closer. His heart skipped a beat. The statue's face looked exactly like Jonathan. "What?" Ethan whispered. Jonathan slowly nodded. "You've noticed. This isn't Alexander. It's me." Ethan froze. "I don't understand." Jonathan looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "There never was an Alexander Ashcroft. There never was a first keeper." Ethan's breathing became shallow. "What are you saying?" Jonathan took one final step toward him. The council created the story. They needed a legend. They needed people to believe this cycle had always existed. But the truth is much darker. Jonathan's voice trembled. "I was the first." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "You?" Jonathan nodded. "I didn't find the watch. I built it." The chamber fell silent. At that exact moment, every statue in the room slowly turned its head toward Ethan. Stone scraped against stone. One by one, all 12 statues opened their eyes, and they were glowing gold. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Memory Chamber. The sound of grinding stone echoed through the underground chamber. One by one, the 12 statues turned their heads toward Ethan. Their eyes glowed with a soft golden light. Not bright, not blinding, but alive. Ethan instinctively stepped backward. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it over his own breathing. "Jonathan." "What are they doing?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the statues with an expression Ethan had never seen before. Regret. Deep, unbearable regret. They've awakened. Awakened for what? To remember. The golden light inside the statue's eyes grew brighter. Suddenly, the floor beneath Ethan began to tremble. Fine cracks spread across the ancient stone. A low humming sound filled the chamber. It was neither mechanical nor natural. It sounded like hundreds of distant voices speaking all at once. Then, the center of the room slowly opened. A circular platform rose from below. It was made entirely of polished black stone. At its center rested a crystal sphere, almost the size of a human head. Inside the crystal, golden particles floated like tiny stars. They moved slowly, swirling in endless patterns. Jonathan whispered, "The Memory Chamber." Ethan stared at the sphere. "What is it?" Jonathan walked toward it carefully. Every keeper leaves behind one memory. Not a written record. Not a photograph. A real memory. A living memory. Ethan frowned. Why? So the next keeper understands the cost. Jonathan gently placed his hand on the crystal. Immediately, the golden particles began to spin faster. The chamber faded. Darkness, complete darkness. Then, a tiny spark of light appeared. It grew larger and larger, until Ethan realized he was standing inside a memory. It wasn't like watching a movie. He was there. He could hear the wind, smell the rain, feel the cold. A small workshop stood before him. Snow covered the roof. A wooden sign swung gently in the wind. Hale Clockmaker's Ethan looked at Jonathan. Only, it wasn't the Jonathan he knew. This man looked younger, much younger, perhaps 28 years old. His clothes were clean. His eyes were full of hope. His hands were free of the golden cracks. Inside the workshop, dozens of clocks lined the walls. Some were pocket watches. Others were beautiful grandfather clocks. Each one had been crafted by hand. Young Jonathan smiled as he worked. He laughed to himself while adjusting tiny gears. The room felt warm, peaceful. It was impossible to imagine this cheerful young craftsman becoming the lonely keeper Ethan knew. A woman entered the workshop. She carried 2 steaming cups of tea. Her smile lit up the room. Jonathan's face brightened the moment he saw her. "You're working too hard again," she teased. "I almost have it." "You've been saying that for 3 months." He laughed. "I know." She placed a cup beside him. "So, did you finally solve your impossible problem?" Jonathan nodded excitedly. "I think I did." He carefully picked up a beautiful golden pocket watch. Unlike the one Ethan had found, this watch looked unfinished, simple, elegant, hopeful. No strange symbols, no glowing light, just extraordinary craftsmanship. "What does it do?" the woman asked. Jonathan smiled. "It keeps perfect time." She laughed softly. "Every watch is supposed to do that." Jonathan shook his head. "No, this one doesn't measure time. It listens to it." The woman looked confused. Jonathan opened the watch. The tiny gears inside moved with incredible precision. Then, for a single second, the room became silent. Every other clock stopped ticking. Only the golden watch continued to move. Jonathan whispered, "I can hear it." "Hear what?" "The future." The woman's smile disappeared. She looked frightened. "Jonathan, what have you built?" Before he could answer, the watch began glowing. Not brightly, just enough to illuminate the workshop. Then the ticking became louder, faster, stronger. Jonathan's expression changed. His excitement vanished. Confusion replaced it. The watch was no longer following his movements. Its hands spun wildly on their own. The room shook. Every clock on the walls began spinning backward. The window shattered. Snow rushed into the workshop. The woman screamed. Jonathan reached for her, but something invisible pushed them apart. The golden light exploded. Ethan instinctively covered his eyes. When the light faded, the workshop was gone. Only Jonathan remained, alone, standing in the middle of an endless white void. He looked around desperately. "Emily!" No answer. He shouted louder. "Emily!" Only silence answered him. He fell to his knees. The watch rested in his trembling hands. For the first time, its surface began to crack. Tiny golden lines spread across the metal, the same cracks Ethan had seen in Jonathan's skin. A voice echoed through the emptiness. Not Jonathan's, not Emily's. Something older, something impossible. It spoke only one sentence. Time always collects its debt. The memory dissolved. Ethan found himself back inside the underground chamber. He was breathing heavily. His eyes were filled with tears. Jonathan stood silently beside the crystal sphere. He never looked at Ethan. Instead, he stared at the floor. "My wife," he whispered. "Emily. I searched for her for 140 years. I searched every century, every country, every possible future. I never found her." A long silence followed. Finally, Ethan asked quietly, "Is she dead?" Jonathan slowly shook his head. "I don't know. She's simply gone." At that exact moment, the crystal sphere began glowing violently. Golden light burst through the chamber. One of the statues suddenly pointed toward the far wall. Ancient stone blocks slid apart with a deafening roar. A hidden passage was revealed. Cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond. Jonathan's face turned pale. "No, it shouldn't be opening." Ethan looked at him. "What is it?" Jonathan whispered words he had hoped never to speak again. "The vault, where the lost years are kept." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Vault of Lost Years. A freezing wind rushed from the hidden passage. It smelled of ancient stone, dust, and rain that had fallen centuries ago. The chamber grew silent once again. Even the glowing statues lowered their heads, as though showing respect to whatever lay beyond the doorway. Jonathan stared into the darkness. His face had turned pale, for the first time since Ethan had met him. Jonathan looked afraid, not cautious, not worried. Afraid. Ethan had never imagined such an expression could exist on the face of a man who had lived for more than a century. "What is the vault?" Ethan asked quietly. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes. "I've spent 140 years making sure this door never opened again." His voice was barely a whisper. "I prayed no one would ever see what lies inside." He looked directly at Ethan. "But the watch has chosen otherwise." Without another word, Jonathan stepped into the passage. Ethan followed. The corridor was narrow. Its walls were carved from smooth black stone. Thousands of tiny golden lines ran through the rock like veins. They pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Soon Ethan noticed something strange. There were doors, hundreds of them. Every few feet, another stone door stood along the corridor. Each was marked with a single year: 1886, 1912, 1945, 1969, 2001, 2026, and countless others. Some doors looked untouched. Others were cracked. A few were chained shut with thick iron chains covered in strange symbols. Ethan stopped in front of one marked 1998. "What's behind these?" Jonathan answered without looking back. "Years." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean, years?" Jonathan stopped walking. He rested one hand against the cold stone. "Every year humanity has forgotten. The moments erased from history. The choices that never happened. The futures that were prevented. They're all kept here." Ethan stared at the endless hallway. "So every door contains another version of history?" Jonathan nodded. "History doesn't disappear. It waits." They continued walking. After several minutes, the corridor finally ended. A gigantic circular door stood before them. It was unlike any door Ethan had ever seen. It was made entirely of gold. Thousands of tiny gears covered its surface. At its center, the familiar symbol of the eye surrounded by 12 rays of light. Jonathan reached into his coat. He removed the golden watch. For a moment he hesitated. Then he pressed it against the center of the door. The gears began turning, one after another. Slowly, patiently. Like a giant machine awakening after centuries of sleep, with a deep rumble. The vault opened. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The room beyond was enormous, far larger than the library above. Rows upon rows of enormous glass cylinders stretched into the darkness. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Inside every cylinder floated shimmering golden light. Some glowed brightly. Others flickered weakly. Some had gone completely dark. "What are these?" Ethan whispered. Jonathan walked toward the nearest cylinder. Inside floated dozens of tiny scenes. Children laughing, families eating dinner, graduation ceremonies, wedding vows, birthdays, simple moments, happy moments. Their memories. Jonathan placed his hand gently against the glass. No, he corrected himself. Their entire lives. Ethan stared in disbelief. Whose lives? Jonathan looked down. The lives that disappeared when time was changed. Ethan's heart sank. "You mean, if someone saves one person?" Jonathan nodded. "Someone else may never be born. If one disaster is prevented, another future vanishes. Nothing is free." Ethan slowly walked between the glowing cylinders. Everyone represented a life that had once been possible. Lives no one remembered. Lives no history book would ever record. Yet they had existed. Somewhere. Once. Then, something caught Ethan's attention. One cylinder stood alone. Unlike the others, it glowed with brilliant white light. It was much larger, and on the glass, a single name had been engraved. Emily Hale. Jonathan froze. His hands began trembling. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." He slowly approached the cylinder. For 140 years, he had searched every timeline, every century, every forgotten corner of history, and now, her name stood before him. Jonathan gently touched the glass. Inside the glowing light, a woman's face slowly appeared. Emily. She looked exactly as she had in the workshop. Young, smiling, alive. Tears filled Jonathan's eyes. "Emily." She looked toward him. Their eyes met for one impossible moment. She smiled. Then she lifted her hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. Jonathan mirrored the gesture. Only inches separated them. Yet they were divided by something far greater than glass. Time itself. Emily's lips moved. She spoke silently. Jonathan's expression changed. "What?" He leaned closer. "What did you say?" She repeated the words. Ethan couldn't hear them, but Jonathan could. The color drained from his face. He stepped backward. "No, no, this isn't possible!" Ethan rushed to him. "What did she say?" Jonathan looked at him with eyes filled with horror. "She said..." He struggled to breathe. "Don't trust the council." Before Ethan could respond, a deafening alarm echoed through the vault. Every cylinder began flashing. Golden light filled the chamber. The enormous entrance slammed shut behind them. Then a calm, emotionless voice echoed from every direction. "Security breach detected. Unauthorized truth has been revealed. Initiating memory erasure protocol." Jonathan's eyes widened. He grabbed Ethan by the arm. "We have to run." "What about Emily?" Jonathan looked at the glowing cylinder one last time. Pain filled his face. "If we stay, we'll forget she ever existed." The floor shook violently. Cracks spread across the glass cylinders, one by one. They began to shatter. Golden memories poured into the air like millions of glowing stars. And somewhere, deep within the collapsing vault, a little girl's voice cried out, "Please, don't leave me here." End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Girl Between Seconds. The cry echoed through the collapsing vault. "Please, don't leave me here." It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was heartbreakingly calm, like the voice of someone who had waited so long. She had almost forgotten what hope sounded like. Jonathan froze. His eyes widened. "No," he whispered. "I know that voice." The chamber shook violently. Another row of crystal cylinders shattered. Millions of glowing memories escaped into the air. Some drifted upward like tiny stars. Others vanished the instant they touched the floor. The alarm continued repeating its warning. "Memory erasure protocol in progress. All unauthorized witnesses will be reset." Ethan looked toward the darkness. The little girl's voice came again. "Is someone finally here?" Without thinking, Ethan ran toward the sound. "Ethan!" Jonathan shouted. "Come back!" But Ethan was already disappearing into the maze of collapsing corridors. The farther he ran, the quieter everything became. The alarms faded. The explosions faded. Even the ticking of the golden watch disappeared. At the end of a narrow passage, he found a small circular room. Unlike the rest of the vault, it was untouched. Dust covered the stone floor. The walls were carved with hundreds of tiny clocks. Every one of them had stopped at exactly the same time. 12 o'clock. In the center of the room sat a little girl. She looked no older than 10 years old. She wore a pale blue dress that belonged to another century. Her long brown hair rested neatly over her shoulders. She held a small stuffed rabbit in her arms. She looked up as Ethan entered. Then, she smiled. I knew someone would come. Ethan slowly approached. Are you okay? The girl tilted her head. I don't remember. What do you mean? I've been waiting. For how long? She looked around the room. I forgot. Her answer sent chills down Ethan's spine. What is your name? The girl frowned thoughtfully. I used to know. She closed her eyes. After a long silence, she whispered, I think it was Lily. Ethan knelt beside her. Lily, can you tell me why you're here? She looked at the stuffed rabbit in her hands. My father told me to wait. When did he tell you that? She smiled faintly. The day before yesterday. Ethan looked around the ancient room. Dust covered everything. The stone walls had clearly stood untouched for centuries. Lily, how long have you really been here? The little girl looked confused. I don't understand the question. Before Ethan could answer, Jonathan rushed into the room. The moment he saw the child, he stopped breathing. His face turned completely white. No, he whispered. It can't be. Lily looked at him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the little girl smiled. Hello? Jonathan's knees gave way. He collapsed to the floor. Tears streamed down his face. Ethan. His voice trembled. You have no idea who she is. Ethan looked between them. Who is she? Jonathan struggled to speak. Finally, he whispered, This is my daughter. Silence filled the room. Ethan stared at the little girl. Your daughter? Jonathan nodded slowly. Lily Hale. But Ethan looked from Jonathan to Lily. She hasn't aged. Jonathan gave a broken laugh. No, because she isn't living in time anymore. He gently picked up the stuffed rabbit. I made this for her. The little girl smiled. Daddy said he'd be right back. Jonathan closed his eyes. His shoulders shook. I did. I promised her I'd return before bedtime. He looked at Ethan. That was 140 years ago. Ethan's heart sank. The realization hit him all at once. The watch hadn't only taken Jonathan's wife, it had stolen his daughter as well. Lily reached for Jonathan's hand. Did you fix your watch? Jonathan couldn't answer. She continued innocently. Mom said you work too much. She told me we'd all have dinner together tonight. Jonathan broke down completely. For over a century, he had carried the weight of endless time. But nothing had hurt him as deeply as hearing those simple words. Because for Lily, it was still the same day. The day everything changed. She had never experienced another sunrise, never celebrated another birthday, never grown older. She had been trapped between 1 second and the next. Suddenly, the golden watch began vibrating violently in Jonathan's hand. Its cover flew open by itself. The hand spun so fast they became a blur. A voice echoed from inside the watch. Not cold, not mechanical. This time, it sounded almost human. The balance cannot contain two Hales. Jonathan slowly stood. His face changed. The sadness disappeared. In its place came determination. He looked directly at Ethan. I finally understand. Understand what? Jonathan gently lifted Lily into his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder as though he had never left. The council lied about everything. They told me I had to protect time. They told me sacrifice was necessary. He looked at his daughter. But time was never asking for sacrifice. He turned toward Ethan. It was asking for truth. At that exact moment, the walls of the chamber cracked open. Brilliant golden light poured through the fractures. The entire vault began collapsing around them, and from somewhere beyond the light, the 12 masked members of the council stepped forward. Their leader raised his watch. His voice echoed through the ruins. Return the child. Jonathan tightened his grip on Lily. Then, For the first time in 140 years. He smiled. No. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The War Beyond Time. The council leader lowered his golden watch for a single heartbeat. No one moved. Jonathan stood at the center of the collapsing chamber with Lily in his arms. Ethan was beside him. The 12 masked figures formed a perfect circle around them. Golden light poured through the cracks in the walls. The ancient vault trembled beneath their feet. The council leader finally spoke. "You have violated the first law," Jonathan answered calmly. "There was never a first law. The council wrote it." Another member stepped forward. "You have endangered the balance." Jonathan shook his head. "No. I've endangered your control." The chamber fell silent. The council members looked at one another. For the first time, they seemed uncertain. Ethan noticed something. They weren't acting like all-powerful guardians anymore. They looked like frightened people, desperately trying to protect a secret. The council leader slowly removed his silver mask. Ethan gasped. The man looked completely ordinary. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, tired eyes, no glowing face, no supernatural appearance. Just an old man. One by one. The other 11 members removed their masks as well. Each looked different. Different ages, different faces, different centuries. But every one of them carried the same exhausted expression. The leader sighed. "You deserve the truth." Jonathan laughed bitterly. 140 years too late. The old man ignored him. "The council did not create the watch." "No. But we did create the prison." Ethan frowned. "Prison?" The old man nodded. "The first time Jonathan used the watch, he tore a hole through time. It wasn't intentional, but the damage was real. For weeks, entire towns disappeared. Days repeated themselves. Children remembered futures that hadn't happened. People woke up decades older, or decades younger." Ethan remembered Clara's words. "The watch doesn't move through time. It brings time to you." Now they finally made sense. The old man continued. "We couldn't destroy the watch, so we built something else. A system. A prison. The keepers." Jonathan looked at him coldly. "You turned one mistake into generations of suffering." The old man lowered his head. "Yes. And every year, we hoped someone would find a better answer." Silence filled the chamber. Ethan looked around. "So, all of this? The hall? The library? The council? It was all created to contain the damage?" The leader nodded. "But containment is not healing." Jonathan smiled sadly. "Exactly." Lily tugged gently on Jonathan's sleeve. "Daddy, why is everyone crying?" Jonathan looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Because we've forgotten how to hope." The little girl looked around the room. Then she asked the simplest question anyone had spoken all day. "Why don't we just fix it?" The adults fell silent. The council members exchanged confused glances. One elderly woman whispered, "We tried." Lily tilted her head. "No. You tried not to break it more. That's different." Jonathan stared at his daughter. A memory suddenly flashed across his face. He whispered, "Emily." Ethan looked at him. "What?" Jonathan smiled through tears. Emily used to say exactly the same thing. He slowly looked down at the golden watch, then at Lily, then at Ethan. "I've been trying to protect time, when I should have been trying to heal it." The watch suddenly opened by itself. Its hand stopped spinning. For the first time since Ethan had found it, they pointed to exactly 12 o'clock, the chamber filled with warm, golden light. Not harsh, not frightening. Gentle, peaceful. A voice echoed through the vault. It wasn't inside Ethan's head anymore. Everyone heard it. It spoke with calm kindness. At last, someone understands. Every person looked toward the watch. The voice continued. I was never created to choose keepers. I was created to return what was lost. Jonathan slowly closed his eyes. So the council misunderstood your purpose. The watch answered. Fear changes memory. Memory changes history. History becomes belief. The old council leader dropped to his knees. We spent generations protecting the wrong thing. The watch remained silent for several moments. Then it spoke again. There remains one final wound. A beam of golden light shot upward. It formed an image above the chamber. Ethan stared in amazement. The image showed Blackwood Forest. Not today, not in 1886, but far, far older. The forest stretched untouched beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. At its center, the giant oak tree stood alone. Its roots surrounded something buried deep underground. The image zoomed closer. Beneath the roots rested another watch. Unlike Jonathan's, unlike Ethan's. This one was larger, older. Its surface was cracked. Dark shadows leaked from its broken casing. Jonathan's expression changed instantly. No, the watch whispered. The first watch. The true source. The council members stared in disbelief. The leader shook his head. That's impossible. We searched everywhere. The watch replied. You searched through time. You never searched beneath it. The image faded. The chamber trembled one final time. A massive crack split the floor from one end of the vault to the other. Jonathan looked at Ethan. His eyes were filled with hope for the first time in over a century. The story isn't over. Ethan nodded slowly. No, it's only beginning. Far above them, deep beneath the roots of the ancient oak tree, something began to tick. Tick. A pause. Tick. Another. Then, for the first time in centuries, a second watch answered. Tick. End of chapter 11. Only the final chapter remains, where Ethan, Jonathan, Lily, and the council journey beneath Blackwood Forest to uncover the true origin of the first watch and decide the fate of time itself. Chapter 12. The Heart of Time. Final chapter. The sound echoed through the ancient earth. Tick. A pause. Tick. Then another answered from somewhere far below. Two watches, two heartbeats, separated by centuries, calling to one another. For a moment, no one spoke. Jonathan slowly closed the golden watch in his hand. The first watch is awake, he whispered. The council leader looked toward the ceiling of the collapsing vault. If it fully awakens. He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone understood. The world above would not simply lose time. It would lose reality itself. Moments later, the group emerged from the hidden tunnels beneath Blackwood Forest. Night had fallen. A full moon hung above the ancient trees. The forest looked exactly as Ethan remembered it. Yet everything felt different. The air vibrated with invisible energy. The ground itself seemed alive. Even the leaves on the trees moved without wind. Lily looked around in wonder. So this is tomorrow. Jonathan smiled softly. For you? Yes. She reached for his hand. He held it tightly, afraid that if he let go, time might steal her away again. The giant oak tree stood silently in the center of the clearing. Its massive roots stretched across the ground like ancient rivers. The bark glowed faintly with golden veins. The closer they walked, the louder the ticking became. Tick, tick, tick. Ethan knelt beside the roots. Something shimmered beneath the soil. Without saying a word, he began digging. Jonathan joined him. Then Clara. Then Elias. Even the members of the council removed their robes and knelt beside them. For the first time in generations, they were no longer keepers. They were simply people, working together. Minutes passed. The earth grew softer. Finally, Ethan's fingers struck metal. A deep metallic sound echoed through the clearing. Everyone froze. Carefully, Jonathan lifted the object from the ground. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't polished. It wasn't golden. It looked ancient, cracked, blackened by time. Its glass was broken. Its gears were exposed. Dark shadows drifted from the cracks. "This," Jonathan whispered, "is the first watch." The moment he touched it, the forest disappeared. Ethan found himself standing inside an endless sea of stars. There was no ground, no sky, only light. Floating before him stood a single figure, an elderly man wearing the simple clothes of a 19th century clockmaker. His white beard moved gently in a breeze that did not exist. His eyes were kind, peaceful. He smiled. "I've been waiting." Ethan looked around. "Who are you?" The old man bowed slightly. "My name is Alexander Ashcroft." Jonathan stared in disbelief. "But I thought—" Alexander smiled. "You thought I never existed." He looked toward Jonathan. "I did." Jonathan's voice shook. "Then I wasn't the first?" Alexander gently placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "No. You were the first to carry the burden. I was the first to make the mistake." Silence filled the endless stars. Alexander slowly held up the cracked watch. "When I built this, I believed time was something to control. I was wrong." "What is time?" Ethan asked. Alexander looked around at the endless light. "Time is memory. It is love. It is every goodbye. And every new beginning. It was never meant to be owned." Jonathan lowered his head. "I've spent 140 years trying to control it." Alexander smiled kindly. "And that is why you suffered." Alexander looked toward Ethan. "The watch chose you because you still believe there is another way." Ethan frowned. "What way?" Alexander pointed toward the cracked first watch. "Do not repair it." Jonathan looked confused. "If we don't repair it, won't time collapse?" Alexander shook his head. "No. The watch isn't broken. Our fear is." He held out the ancient watch. "For generations, people believed time needed a guardian. It never did. It only needed people willing to let it flow." The council leader stepped forward. "Then what have we been protecting?" Alexander answered gently. "Your fear of losing what you love." No one spoke. The truth settled over the forest like morning mist. Lily slowly walked toward Alexander. She held out her small stuffed rabbit. "My daddy missed bedtime." Alexander knelt and smiled. "I know. Can you fix it?" Alexander looked at Jonathan, then at Emily's memory, then at Ethan. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, but not by changing yesterday." He gently placed one hand on Jonathan's shoulder and the other on Lily's head. Golden light spread through the clearing. The cracked first watch began dissolving into thousands of tiny golden sparks, one by one. The other golden watches dissolved as well. Jonathan looked down at his hands. The glowing cracks disappeared. For the first time in 140 years, he looked completely human. The endless ticking stopped. The forest became quiet, peaceful, warm. The stars above seemed brighter than ever before. Far across the clearing, a familiar voice spoke. "Jonathan." He turned slowly. Standing beneath the giant oak tree was Emily, not trapped inside a crystal, not a memory. Real. She smiled through tears. "You finally came home." Jonathan couldn't move. Then Lily laughed. "Mom!" She ran across the clearing. Emily caught her in a warm embrace. Jonathan followed. The three of them held one another beneath the ancient oak tree. No words were needed. Some moments are too important for language. Alexander turned toward Ethan. "My work is finished." "So is yours." "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Alexander smiled. "You go home. And remember." The old clockmaker slowly faded into golden light. His final words drifted through the forest. The greatest gift time ever gave humanity was never more time. It was the chance to spend it with one another. Then he was gone. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds sang overhead. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. He was lying beside the giant oak tree. His backpack rested nearby. His camera was exactly where he had dropped it. Everything looked normal. Had it all been a dream? He stood. The forest was peaceful. No ticking. No hidden door. No mysterious light. Only silence. He smiled sadly. Perhaps it was over. As he picked up his backpack, something fell from one of the side pockets. A small wooden rabbit, hand-carved, the same one Lily had carried. Ethan held it in his hand. He smiled. "No," he whispered. It was real. Months later, Ethan published a book. He didn't write about magic, or time travel, or mysterious watches. Instead, he wrote about the value of ordinary moments: family dinners, sunsets, old photographs, laughter, friendship, second chances. The book ended with a single sentence: "The most valuable thing you will ever own is not the time you save, but the time you share." And somewhere, on a quiet autumn evening, deep within Blackwood Forest, the ancient oak tree stood peacefully. No ticking, no whispers, only the wind, carrying the story of those who finally learned that time was never an enemy. It was always a gift. The end.